Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today is a Stashing with Stephanie day where we talk about a brand new fat quarter friendly pattern that we have designed to go with this month's Stashing with Stephanie fabric bundle. And each month we feature a brand new modern quilting line in that, and we designed this pattern specifically inspired by that fabric. Last month we did one that was a little bit more challenging, so this month we're going to do something a little bit easier. We kind of go back and forth between that. That way we can challenge your skills, push you a little bit, and then also then come back and have something that's just simple and easy and that you can whip up. This month's design is called Lattice, and it is using Truvel from Art Gallery Fabrics. I really love this. It's really beautiful floral fabric. It's from the Art Gallery Fabric Studio, which is basically a house line. It was designed without a major fabric designer name behind it. There's actually been some really fabulous house lines that have come out this year, and this is one of them. We'll take a little bit closer look at the fabric in a bit, but today's design goes super fast because we're going to strip piece almost the entire block. All the rows will be strip piece, and we're going to do things a little bit differently today with pressing than I normally do, so that way we can put it together without using any pins if you are so brave. So we're going to give that a go. Let's take a peek at the fabric and then we'll get started. This is Truvel from Art Gallery Fabrics. We've got this beautiful design in here, and it is very fussy cuttable. We just did a video on that, so you could easily cut that out, have it be front and center. We're just going to cut straight across and have the color be the star of the show, but that's an option if you are into that. And it's just this really great mix of modern florals and geometrics, and there are two main colorways, but they both work really well together. There's a very big large floral, and then there's going to be a smaller one coming up here, but then there's always a good mix of, you know, smaller players like that one and this one, which kind of help those other ones really pop. Now, Art Gallery Fabrics has the highest thread count in the industry, and so just like with sheets, that means that this fabric is very soft, and it drapes really nicely, so it can be used very easily with garments. And because it has such a high thread count, that makes it really fabulous for mass, because that high thread count in the weave is going to offer more protection than some of the other fabrics that are out there and available. So really great, really soft. Perfect for garments, quilts, mass, whatever you want to make this for. This is just such a fun geometric print. And I really just love these color combinations. This is one of my favorite prints. I really just like how it looks. I mean, it's just lines, but it really is designed really well and gives that fun contrast. That'd be a fun binding. And then this really fun floral, nice modern, airy print. It's pink, but not like too pink, too girly pink. Here's that same print, but more in a pink and orange colorway. And finally back to that bright, bold floral. One more plug about Stashing with Stephanie before we get to the sewing, and that is you get 12 fat quarters for the price of 10. It's $29.99 plus shipping, and then we'll send you a coupon code. You actually get two. You can pick which one is the better deal to use. You can get 25% off your order to get additional fabrics to complete your kit. We'll offer finishing kits for that, and there are kits available for this quilt online if you're not a member of the club. And also, or you can get $10 off a $20 coupons if you just want to get, you know, an additional 2 yards of fabric because you like it and you want to do something with it but not this, then you can pick and choose from that as well. All right, plus, oh, and you get a whole bunch of free patterns. We're at over a $200 free pattern, and very soon we're going to have a video about a book, in my next book that's coming out, that is all fat quarter friendly patterns like this one. So stay tuned for that big announcement coming soon. So our entire block is going to be made up of two types of rows. The sewing together part is going to be the same, just the makeup of background to print is going to be different depending on which one you're doing. I'm going to show you how to do the second and the third row in each block here today, and just know that the process for the first and fourth is the same. You just have to pay attention and swap out this fabric for a background. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just strip piece these guys together. I'm going to do a set of 2, and then I'm going to join them to have a set of 4, and then we'll press once we get all that together. All right, so to strip piece, for those of you who haven't done it before, we have an entire video on it in our completely free beginner quilting video tutorial series. But what you're going to do is you're just going to line these guys right sides together here, and we're just going to stitch down with our presser foot even with the side. Now, one note for this pattern, Of course, all your measurements and everything are available at the pattern, Lattice, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. However, one thing you want to pay attention to is sometimes, like, this is a pretty wide selvage, and we don't want to use that because one, selvages have a different weave than the rest of the fabric, so it doesn't wash the same. But also in this case, it's really white, and then we have really teal. So what you want to do when you are laying these guys right sides together is make sure that your selvage edges are very, very even, because that's going to give you the length that you need in the rest of the strip, because we need at least 21 inches from the point where the fabric starts to the end of the fabric on the other side over here in order to be able to cut the right amount. Now, if you screw up and you can't quite get that many, then you're just going to have a little bit smaller quilt. It's not like it's the end of the world and you completely ruined everything. You just won't be able to get as many blocks as you could if you're able to get that whole 21 inches. For that reason, I don't recommend pre-washing your fabric for this, because sometimes the fabric can shrink a little bit when you pre-wash it and then you can't get that full length. Whereas if you buy good quilt shop quality fabric like this, it will all shrink evenly when you wash it without any bleeding, although throw some color catcher or like 3 or 4 in just to be on the safe side when you wash it for the first time. And that way it will all shrink then as opposed to now, and then you won't be able to get as many pieces. So off my soapbox. All right, so I'm just gonna lay these guys right sides together and we're just gonna stitch right down the side here. All right, so I've got my sewing machine set to a 1/4 inch stitch, and I have my presser foot lined up even with the edge of my strips, which are put together right sides together with the selvage edges touching. I'm gonna go ahead and start sewing. And I never pin these, I just kind of put my finger on and I let the feed dogs pull that up. And then when I can't go up any further, then what I do is I kind of lift these guys up and I realign them to get these edges nice and even, put my finger down again and let that pull up. Then you're just going to keep on doing that through the end of the strip. Now when you get down to the end of the strip, you can see I've got my finger here, and if I let go, then I have to rely on my sewing machine to sew straight, which it will most of the time. However, to make sure you maintain that 1/4 inch seam all the way down, what I like to do is just move my finger to the left, and then I can help guide that straight all the way through, so I've got a nice straight seam going all the way to the end, and I maintain that accuracy. All right, I'm going to chain stitch these because it makes it go so much faster. So to do that, I'm just going to grab my next set, get them lined up again with those selvages touching and nice and even, and with right sides together, just start sewing. You just leave a couple of threads space in between and let the feed dogs take it through. It saves you a lot of time and thread, and you can just whip through all these. All right, so I've got my 2 pieces. I'm going to go ahead and unfold them like so. And you can see that they are together, and I just need to switch these around because I need that background to be on the outside of the block so that it ends up in a nice little corner there. Now, I'm not going to press yet. I'm going to wait until my entire strip row is together, and then I will press, because then I can make sure that they're all going in the right direction for this one, because we're not going to press our seams open. We're going to press them to one side. I know if you watch me, like 99.9% of the time, I'm going to recommend that you press them open because you get really flat seams and really great joins. But for a block like this, we can actually save a lot of time by pressing them to one side or the other. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and flip these guys right sides together, again making sure that these selvages are nice and lined up, so that way we have a full 21 inches to work with from the edge of the selvage to where the fat 1/4 strip ends up on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and flip these guys right sides together, and we're just going to stitch along this seam again. All right, so now we can see that we've got everything sewn together. We're gonna press this next. And when I was doing this to get the quilt together, I did half the blocks at a time. So I would essentially prepped enough of these strips and enough for the strips for the rows 1 and 4 all at the same time. And that I felt like I could get done in like an hour or 2 time span. I know not everybody can sew all day long. I have been mom 24/7 pretty much since February when, you know, COVID got crazy. So, you know, I can't just sew all day long because I have little ones who need me, in addition to, you know, running the business and all the other things that I have to do in a day. So I only get little bits of time, and I felt like that was very manageable for me. So I suggest that you split it up into something like that, where you're doing 12 or 24 blocks at a time when you're working on this quilt. It'll give you more feeling like you're getting something accomplished, which is always good and helps motivate you to keep going on that quilt. So like I said earlier, we're gonna press so that the seams are all going underneath the rows. And normally I don't do this for several reasons. One, you have to be careful to make sure that your rows don't kind of start to curve up on you, which can happen if you use sub-quality fabric or you really kind of beat it up the iron. And then also when you do that, that fabric as it folds over uses up a teeny little bit. And so sometimes your fabrics or your pieces don't turn out the way they should, even though you have perfect quarter inch seam that you've double checked and you're doing everything right, because that fabric and that thread take up space. But we're going to be able to lock these seams in place as they join together, because we'll have the different rows going in different directions. We'll make this super fast to put together, and we can do it without pins if you are brave enough to do so. All right, so we're going to have the seams going this way. So what I want to do is pull this down toward me so that this first seam that I'm going to push going that way is right side up. So I'm going to go ahead and set my seam, and I'm just kind of lifting the iron up and working my way down. And what that does is it kind of helps your threads sit in and become one with the fabric. And so it gives you a stronger seam when you do that. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and unfold this. And this is the biggest problem that I see people make when they do this, is what they do is they just plop their iron down right on top of that. And a lot of times you end up with pleats and then things aren't the size that they should be. So what you need to do to avoid that from happening is you need to set your iron completely on the side that you are going to be pressing away from, and then you need to push it up like that, because that way you are pushing that seam open rather than just plopping it down right on top and hoping it all flattens out, because a lot of times it does not. So completely down and then just slide that up. I'm also using this flat side of my iron, and that will help keep this seam nice and straight as I'm working with it, because sometimes, especially when you're doing really long strips, they can have a tendency to kind of curve up when you get to the side, and then you don't have a straight strip piece and you don't have straight rows, and it just creates problems. Now, once I've done one entire row, I like to then go back over it and just hit that again. And this is a point to make sure that everything is nice and straight. If you're examining it and you start to see that it's curving up, then what you need to do is kind of stretch it back out, give it a little tug, get it straight, and go over it and heat set that back where it needs to be. All right, so now we're gonna do the exact same thing for each row going up. So now I've got my middle seam here. So I'm gonna go ahead and fold that back down. I'm gonna set my seam, and then I'm gonna press it up in the same manner as I did before. And we're just gonna do that one row at a time. This is a good opportunity to throw on some Netflix and do it as you go. So again, putting it completely on the side that I've already pressed and then dragging that up and over. All right, we got one final one. So again, fold that back so that way that seam is nice and flat the way it was when you sewed it. Set your seam and then do your press. All right, so we can see our rows are very nice and straight. We don't have any bending, so we're good to go here. I do one final step before I call this done and start cutting, and that's give it a little spritz. This is my favorite non-quilting quilting tool. It is a spray mister that is meant for hair at a hair salon. When you give it a little spritz, it turns the water into an aerosol mist, so that way I can spritz down my seams without getting water droplets all over everything. And I can also just do one spritz per row as opposed to constantly like squirting each little bit, because that's annoying. So now I'm just gonna go over that one more time just to help get that seam really nice and flat, because again, you are gonna have some more bulk with this method than you will pressing seams open, because you have now 3 layers of fabric underneath the area where you pressed it down. And we're gonna use that to our advantage here, but sometimes that can be challenging. So we just want to get it as flat as we possibly can. All right, so this is my widest selvage here. So what I want to do is measure from where the selvage ends to the end of the block to make sure that I have at least 21 inches between that and basically whatever my shortest one is. Sometimes one of the other ones might be a little bit shorter, so you got to pay attention to that. In this case, I've got 21 and a half, so I'm going to be perfectly fine. Now, occasionally you are cutting it close, you don't have 21 inches, but usually you can use a teeny bit of the selvage in that instance. As long as you are using less than 1/4 inch of the selvage, it's going to get hidden in your seam allowance, so you won't see that big white bit, and that will help you. So definitely pay attention to that. It takes definitely a little bit extra time, but you want to make sure that you are cutting correctly here. So there's 2 ways you can do it. Now, what I did is I measured everything from the selvage end once I was sure I had at least 21 inches. If I was tight, what I did was I took my first measurement from this edge where the fold of the fabric was. And again, to get all the measurements and which direction to press everything, you can get that over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. This pattern is called Lattice. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm lining up an inch line with that seam line. And because we have pressed that to one side, your strips might not be the exact size they should be. They might be a teeny bit smaller because, again, that pressing it over takes up a little bit of space, which is why I typically don't use it. But in this case, everything's going to turn out the same size in the end because it's just a bunch of squares, so we can get away with that. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I've got a little bit hanging off beyond where the measurement is that I need to trim this down to. And then as long as I know that I've got this line on that center seam line, I'm going to be able to trim up and be able to have this be nice and square when I sew my rows together. So this is just so much more efficient than cutting a bunch of tiny little squares and then sewing them all together and then pressing them all. This way you can just get it done really super fast and just be done and have the gratification of that and then move on to something else. All right, so now we've got to square this up. So what I want to do is just flip this around, and then I'm still going to line up an inch line with that center seam. And for every single one of these, I counted over to make sure I was cutting to the right length, because if you screw up, you will not have enough to do all the blocks in this quilt. You have to use every single inch, which is great because you waste no fabric, but you want to make sure that you are being very careful with that. All right, so we're going to set that there, and we're just going to keep on cutting down until we've cut all of our rows from our strip set. So again, I count over, make sure I've got it on the right section so I don't screw something up, and always get it in line on the edge here and then also on that inch line. And again, don't freak out if your little bits here are not on an inch line, because we've taken up a little bit of space with the way that we press that fabric. All right, so I'm going to deliberately cut on an angle here to show you how to fix it. If you do that, or if you just get off and your strips kind of get a little wonky when you're pressing them and they're not perfectly straight. I'm lined up at the top here, but on the end I've got too much. So what you want to do if that happens is you just want to overcut a little bit. So I'm just going to scooch it in just a hair, and I'm going to get it as close as I can up top, and then on the bottom here, let's bring this down so you can see a little better. All right, so I'm going to get as close as I can up top, and then at the bottom here, you can see I've got a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch hanging over. So I've got my inch line going across that center, and I can kind of right myself here. And you want to be as careful as you can when you do this. That's why I'm not leaving a whole bunch extra here, because again, we do not have a lot left over at the end of this, so we want to be very careful with that. All right, so now I'm just going to, I've got this edge nice and straight, but this one is not. This one's still crooked. So we're just going to flip that over. We're going to line up the edge that we cut nice and straight. Again, get that inch line in line with that center bit there. And then I'm just going to get off this little tanny little bit that's just hanging off there. All right, so just like that, I've got 6 rows prepped. So that's super easy to do. This is going to be your row 1 and 4. This is going to be your row 2 and 3. These I press in the opposite direction. So here we've got all the seams are coming this way, and here all the seams are going, well, flip it so it's going the right way. So these seams are all going this way and these seams are all going this way. That means those seams are going to lock in place and make it to where we don't have to pin if you're brave enough to give it a try. So let me show you how that works. You can see that I've got my seams going in opposite directions. Here they're going off to my right and here they're going off to my left. So what you can do is very easily just kind of pull those seams together and they will lock in place. They will not go any further. It will feel like a threshold on a floor where there is that nice little transition piece from one level of flooring to the other. And what you want to do if you are going to pin, this is how you do it. What you do is you get that nice and snug in there so that they are right next to each other. And then you're going to just take your little pin and you're going to put it in the right side of your seam allowance. And you want to pin right in the 1/4 inch, right where you're going to sew. The reason why is you're going to be stitching along here and you're going to stop with your needle down in the first half of the seam allowance. And that will kind of act as a pin so you can remove this one and then keep on sewing. So if I, say, were to pin where I'm like way down here, about 1/2 inch away from the edge, then this can move all over the place in the time when it takes me to get to sew that. So then you could have started off with a good join and then messed it up by the time you got there. The other way I see people pin, and I see people do this a lot, and that's not very helpful either, because again, you're not pinning where you're going to be sewing. You want to pin where you're going to sew, because otherwise this part here can shift all over the place and you have a hot mess. But because we have pinned or pressed this in opposite directions, what you can do is you can line that up and kind of feel your way along as you go. Now this is going to take some practice. I suggest you maybe do it with some just scrap fabric that you have hanging around, and you can just do a 4-patch. You don't need to do a whole big line like this, or a 3-patch, something like that. But I'm going to show you how I do it on the sewing machine, because I have not pinned a single block for this entire quilt. I will pin when I put my rows together and assemble the quilt top, because that just makes it more manageable. But this is a pretty small area. You can pretty much keep it in line, and I'm just going to kind of keep lining up as I go. All right, so I'm going to start off by lining up my tips and then also making sure that I've got my bits lined up right here. That's the most important part. Get that started to go with, or to go together. All right, so I've got my tips of my rows lined up, so I'm gonna go ahead and start sewing. And once I'm an inch or so in, I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of lift up. And sometimes you gotta kind of scoot the under part forward, but you wanna match those guys together. And then I just hold my finger over it the same way I was holding my finger over to keep everything lined up along the edge when I was stitching those seams together. So I'm going to stitch, 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 and then again when I get to this point, I'm going to go ahead and move my finger to the side and hold that until I get through. Now at this point, I've just stitched over that seam allowance, so I made that. So now I want to get this part together. So again, I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to slide that seam until it butts right up to the one underneath that's going in the opposite direction. So we're going to sew again. And then I actually usually transfer to my middle finger and just kind of move my pointer finger. And we're going to repeat one more time. I've done this up to like 6, I think, in a row. And then when I get to the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and line up those corners and just put my finger on top. Sew all the way down. All right, it's moment of truth time where we see how well we did with this. And I'm just going to pull that up, and we have got some dang good joins. And it's all because our seams are going in opposite directions. We're gonna take a little bit closer look here. Look at how good that is, and not a single pin. And again, I've got all my seams pressed going this way on the top row and going this way on the bottom row. That way I can just kind of butt those guys up together. They literally do not want to move past each other if you get that seam good and tight. And we're able to get some really fantastic joins doing it that way. And that way you can totally skip pressing or pinning. You have to obviously press, but you can skip pinning to get all your blocks together. And if you can make, in this case, there's 48 blocks in this quilt, that pulling out a single pin until it's time to put your blocks together to make your quilt, that's going to make it go a lot faster. But again, give it a try on fabric that is just some scrap fabric to see how it is and get the hang of it. Then do it on the real deal and you will not regret it. It will make it go so much faster. And again, normally I press seams open, but in this case, we can get a lot of benefits by pressing them from side to side, mostly time saving. And since it's all squares, we don't have to worry about losing a little bit of fabric because we're going to lose that same amount of fabric on every single one. And in this case, we're going to have every single seam is going to butt into every single seam for the entire quilt. So that's pretty awesome. It's going to make our lives a lot easier when it goes to put it together. By following the pressing instructions, which again are included in the pattern with arrows, so hopefully you will not screw it up. So check that out, Lattice at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, I'm gonna go get the second half of this block and I'm gonna sew that together. Then I'm gonna show you how the blocks will get sewn together when you are putting it together. So here's the fun part of this block, because these rows are going in opposite directions when they meet in the center. These seams are also going to be opposite directions. We've got one going this way and one going that way. So again, those seams are going to butt up nicely, even though they could have been part of the same row that got all pressed together, but I mixed it up. So that way we're having, and the fabrics are not repeating in this one block. All right, so I have not pressed yet. I'm gonna wait to do that until the whole block is together, but I'm just gonna lay these guys right sides together, and then I'm just gonna go through and align those as I sew, or you could pin them if you so choose. All right, so this next step is important because we want to press everything going in the same direction for every single block. And this will make it go together really well when we're assembling the entire quilt. So I've got the top row is getting pressed to the left. So when the top row is getting pressed to the left, we're gonna press up. So we're gonna do that just like we did for the others. We're gonna fold everything down and we're gonna work our way from the bottom up. So first I'm gonna set all those seams and make sure you're lifting your iron so you don't accidentally press something going the wrong direction. Then I'm going to first kind of give this a little bit of a finger press, get it going in the right direction when it's nice and warm. And then this is very, very important. You want to, again, make sure that your iron is completely on the row you're pressing away from, and then just drag that up and over. And that will reduce any pleats you have, make sure everything stays the right size, and that you don't have anything wonky going on. Then we're just going to repeat that process, working our way up the entire block. All right, so these are fabulous mirror image blocks. So right now I've got them orientated the same way, where everything is pressed going the same way from rows and the pieces within the rows. So what I'm gonna do here is right now everything is pressing up. So I'm just going to flip this guy around, and now all of a sudden everything is going in opposite directions again. Block looks the same, it's just totally pressed the opposite way. Now you absolutely could sew these guys together without pinning if you wanted when you're assembling your rows, but once you get to assemble your rows together, so you're sewing row 1 to row 2, then I would definitely take the time to pin every single one, because it's just a lot of weight and so things can get shifted around. But if you wanted to just flip these guys right sides together and sew them the way we've been doing it and just going down and lining it up as you go, that's totally optional, and it will again help speed up your process if you don't have to use a single pin until you're ready to, you know, get your rows sewn together. So that would, I mean, this is going so fast for me, just so fast. And as you can see, everything is looking really good. All my joins are really good, everything is nice and flat, but it's because I took care and time when I was pressing, when I was sewing, to make sure everything is the way it should be and is going in opposite directions. So that's kind of fun. I'm not going to sew these together yet because I want to lay it all out on a bed and get them all situated evenly across the quilt. I want to make sure that I have like 6 of this exact block, the way I kind of organize them. I did like 6 of the same. So that way I don't have a bunch of these like all in one corner. That's no good. You want your eye to be moving about the quilt, not drawn to one area because it all looks the same. So I hope you have enjoyed this week's tutorial. Again, it is super fast. It uses almost every inch of your fat quarter, so there's hardly any waste. We're gonna use, I think, one of these guys for the binding because that's gonna be an awesome binding. It's gonna be so cute to just have that little bit of color pulling it out into the end. I think probably this blue, because this blue kind of finalizes it a little bit and ties into a lot of the others, and it's just a dark color for the binding. Always looks really good. So again, this quilt is called Lattice. You can get it at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can get just the pattern, just the kit. You can use your own stash if you want. You can join the club and get some discounts. Again, that's called Stashing with Stephanie. You get a lot of goodies. $29.99 a month for 10 fat quarters for the price of 12, plus coupons to get finishing kits or just extra yardage if you like the fabric and want to do something else with it. Lots of good options. We're going to have a book that we're going to be announcing here in just a little bit. I just got to get that video filmed to show you all the fun patterns that are going to be part of it. So check that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, and over a $200 pattern download right when you join. If you do this, you get access to all the free Stash with Stephanie patterns that we've done to date, plus you'll get a new one every month. So lots of fun goodies. I've rambled. I'm gonna let you go. But I love this fabric. It's super cute, super pretty. This one, like, we totally could have fussy cut, but we didn't. It looks great just the way it is, with just a little bit in there. It's a really good scrappy quilt. So if you've been like saving mass scraps, this could be a fun one to do it with. So until next week, happy quilting.